Welcome to Cracked, the podcast, the program that slays the dragons of mental health by stripping away the shame, embarrassment, fear, and stigma. Because mental health isn't something that affects just some of us, it applies to all of us. Here to shine a new light on areas of mental health that often go unvisited are your hosts, Rebecca Schaper and Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome to Cracked, the podcast slaying the dragons of mental health with me, Sandie Sedgbeer.
And me, Rebecca Schaper.
Adolescence is a unique and formative time in life, as well as a crucial period for developing and maintaining social and emotional habits that are important for mental well-being. The challenges of being a teenager and raising a teenager are well known, but as we've seen over the past year, those challenges have dramatically escalated. This month is Mental Health Awareness Month, and with us today to discuss how we can support our kids through times of stress, anxiety, depression, and emotional turbulence is practicing clinical psychologist and family and teen therapist Lara Honos-Webb, PhD. Lara is the author of several books on attention deficit disorder and is known for her distinctive reframing of mental illnesses that are commonly conceived as detrimental into gifts that offer exceptional strengths. Dr. Lara Honos-Webb, welcome.
I'm so happy to be here with you, Sandie and Rebecca.
Glad to have you too.
Lara, ADHD, behavior problems, anxiety, depression, these are the most commonly diagnosed mental disorders in children. Now, your new book, 6 Super Skills for Executive Functioning, uses the latest knowledge of adolescent neurodevelopment to create tools for teenagers to help them get past their stuck points and learn how to regulate their emotions and mood, improve their focus, enhance their motivation and boost their confidence, which many of them badly need. Mm-hmm. Before we talk about these tools, tell us, what are the stuck points affecting our kids today and what causes them?
Well, I think that with the kind of inundation of social media, one of the things that really keeps teens and kids stuck is this constant comparison to others and this feeling that they can never measure up. And so this sets up a cycle for anxiety and depression and attention problems, because we know that the technology can be addictive and it can also, create disruptions in mood. And so the challenge is how to navigate, which is essentially going to be a fundamental part of our world moving forward. I'm certainly not anti-technology. It solves as many problems and it creates some problems also. And so I think that really one of the stuck points is how to take a broader perspective. And as you know, for teenagers, their perspectives can be very, very narrow. And that narrow perspective, not having a long view because they don't really have it, and all the disruptions in their body, their hormones are changing, their bodies are changing, and the social landscape is changing. And so really giving them this broader perspective to focus on, as you know, my approach is very strength-based. And we do have this almost global mindset that the way you take a person and make them a better person is to patch up their weaknesses. And I'm suggesting this balance of finding those strengths and building on those strengths.
Many of the youth you've worked with, although intellectually incapable or even gifted, are neurologically challenged to succeed in a classroom environment. Differences such as ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, or dyslexia put teens and their parents at odds, often building control battles that invite youth resistance and frustrate and leave parents in a state of burnout. How do you encourage the parents you work with to handle these challenges?
Yeah, I think that it starts off with that first is empathy and connection to a child or a teen. And especially as we're going through this process of, coming out of COVID, having been in COVID, we can't underestimate the impact that this has had in terms of limiting the social connection, which is the number one need of a teen is belonging. And that has been very complicated over this time. And so in terms of the key buzzwords I would say are going to be appreciation. Let's talk about the appreciation deficit disorder. As parents, we come from our anxiety and we're like, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing this? You better do this. We need to lead with building their self-confidence, finding those strengths. And I've had some parents, say things like, I feel like my kid doesn't even have a pulse. They're so, inactive and depressed and in those places. And some parents are saying, I'm having the hard time finding those strengths and positives. And even if you're really in that place, remember, share with them, when you were a kid and you read this big book and you loved reading and you can do it now, or think about the future. I can see you being a politician. You talk so much. I can see you being a CEO. You are so you're so headstrong. Or finding those strengths. If you have to go to the past, if you have to go to the future, if you have to just positively emit or randomly emit positive words, like, I noticed how caring you are with your friends. I noticed how good you're taking care of the pets. Finding those positives and really emphasizing, getting a balance of at least like 5 positives to every negative. And then also appreciation and then acceptance. And that really is going to realize that everyone is different and that figuring out what those positives in what you're calling, neurodiversity, we all have different brains. And so how can you accept a child that is daydreamy and seems to not be able to tune in as they're doing the maybe some places, still doing distance learning is pretty still common, and just being able to say, accept that they're daydreaming and taking that long view. Daydreaming is how we come up with innovation. It's how we come up with creativity. Yeah. And that the world and daydreaming people think of problems and they solve problems. And it's important to remember that school is really emphasizing memorization and getting good grades on tests. And the long view is when you get out into the real world, what most jobs involve is problem solving and innovation and those social and emotional connections, which neurodiverse kids, can be some of their strengths. And so really keeping up that hope and that optimism and being encouraging rather than discouraging.
You use the 6 super skills as a method to address ADHD, addictions, and setting and achieving goals. What are the 6 skills?
So the 6 super skills starts off with, of course, finding gifts, because this is going to be fundamental to creating a self-concept that believes it's capable of handling challenges. The second one is setting goals. And this is building that capacity to plan. A lot of times, and frankly, the kids, their executive functioning is not developed until the age of 25. Right. So we have to help them to develop that executive functioning. And so instead of saying, why can't you think ahead? You can say, let's set some goals. And that can be in school, in health, in, bucket list goals, and personal interests that they have for themselves. And then the third super skill is breaking those goals down into a sequence of smaller steps. And this, they can be, okay, you don't want to get started on your project. Why don't you just get started for 15 minutes? And then you can take a break. And so breaking things down into smaller bits. And then the fourth one is motivation. And this can be increased by self-talk. And it can be as simple as saying, I can do hard things. It can be as simple as saying, once I get started, I'll keep going. And it can be as simple as remembering a past success. Research has found that if you direct a child or a teen to remember a past success that they've had, that motivation will increase. And then the fifth one is mood management. And we can, with the hormones flying, this is going to be, a major concern for almost any child or teen. And parents can really help them by one, validating those emotions, recognizing that it's okay to feel angry and anxious and sad, and helping them to put words onto those emotions. And there's some recent research, and they call it emotional granularity. The more precise the words you use for emotions, the more you can manage them. So adults can really help with that. And then the last one is attention management. And this is based entirely on the science. So, for example, the science shows that one of the most important and effective ways of improving attention is exercise. A small amount, it doesn't have to be enough to get into shape. Sleep, of course, stress management, and then time in nature. And taking naps or breaks is important to restore attention, happiness, and of course, limiting technology.
Exactly. Anger is a powerful self-learning emotion. Mm-hmm. Why is it so difficult for teens to manage their emotions? This is where, personally, I feel teenagers become self-destructive because they want to be seen and heard. Could you talk about flexibility, thinking, impulse control, and emotional regulation? And also, could you give us examples as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in terms of, let's take anger, as you're saying, that one of the ways of managing it is to take this broader perspective and to use flexible thinking. And it could be, why did my friends, they look at Snapchat and they see that their friends are together and they weren't invited. And there's this immediate anger, like they don't like me. And then, a teen may go to, I don't have any friends, although it's just one, post on Snapchat. And so the flexible thinking could be to say, first of all, we want to validate that emotion and help them to accept it. I'm angry, I feel hurt, and help them have those labels. But then the flexible thinking could be, why else would they have all been together and you not be invited? And it may be that they were, studying together and they decided to go out afterwards. It could be that has nothing to do with them not liking you, that they, that just happened to be a different situation, or it may be that maybe someone doesn't like you. What does that mean? I mean, that maybe some people think you're bossy, but some people think that they love your leadership skills. Mm-hmm. And so really, again, this acceptance of that anger, and that it's healthy to feel anger, to say, I have to feel it to heal it, but also I can take this broader perspective.
What about the kids that are pretty resistant, to their parents telling them anything?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, one thing that parents can try is they can say this phrase, tell yourself, which could mean like, for example, tell yourself, like if you want them to stay focused on their screens or, in their classes, if they're digital or distance, and say, tell yourself to stay tuned in. Or tell yourself, if they're struggling with homework that's taking too long, tell yourself slow to success. The other thing that parents can do is they can say, remember a time when you had success with this in the past. Because you're not telling them what to do, but we know that the effect of that is that it will boost their motivation. Mm-hmm. And I think parents can also say, imagine yourself a year from now. What would that self a year from now tell you to do right now? Because what you want to do is you don't want to create a control battle. You want to create a tension between who they want to be a year from now and what they're doing now.
Exactly. Yeah. And when you work with teenagers, do you also bring in the parents as well? So it's kind of like the teenager and the parents during the therapy, or do you just offer the teenager tools and then do you have a separate therapy for the parents? I'm just curious how you do your...
Yeah, so that has changed during the pandemic because most of my sessions are now, of course, online. And before the pandemic, I would usually check in with parents. And again, it depends if they're driving themselves, but I'll check in with the parents at the beginning or the end of the session, and kind of give them the kind of tools that I just mentioned about some other, some strategies for avoiding that control battle. And so there usually be a check-in point at the beginning or end of a session.
Do you find they're more receptive when the parents aren't present?
Are not?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I think that, that they definitely feel like that they are more free to speak and that they'll maybe be more honest and kind of let it and talk about their anger towards their parents.
Yeah.
And that's a learning process for parents, that it is a developmentally normal for your kids and your teens to be angry at you, and that's healthy. And you can say to them, it's okay to be angry. And it's just, being angry is simply setting a boundary. And of course, those boundaries, as they develop, that's their job description, is to become an independent person. So that anger is really in the service of the healthy development of establishing a separate identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Teens are usually wary of doing anything that might seem weird, of being made fun of by their peers. Are you finding that the kids you work with are grasping and using the tools you offer?
Yeah, I mean, because this doesn't have to be in any way a public thing. And I think that, the one thing I want to mention, return to, is what I call the appreciation deficit disorder. And what I mean by that is, I can't tell you whether it's adults or teens or kids when I say, when was the time you felt the most appreciated in your life? Mm. This is not an easy question for people to answer.
Right.
And session after session, when was the time you felt the most appreciated in the last week? People struggle to answer these questions. And that's why I've come up with this term, appreciation deficit disorder, because it's so hard. People aren't getting it from their teachers, and parents and teens, and even parents and kids get caught in these control battles. Parents parent from anxiety, and they forget that you need to sort of nurture and nourish those strengths. And so I think that the first super skill, that's why it's number one, because there's such a deficit of it. And then I would say also, in terms of like, which ones do they like or like less? I think that for some people, setting goals is a challenge, and but they usually can take into that. And then one of the easiest things in terms of how effective it is and how quickly it is chunking. What's the smallest part? So, for example, I will say to someone, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your level of motivation to get started on that project you have? And they'll say 3. And I will say, well, what if you just said, I'm going to get started for 15 minutes and just preview the assignment, and then I'll take a break. What's your level of motivation? And it's usually a 7 or 8.
I guess I'm hearing from you, they don't feel so overwhelmed with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And, I use
achievable.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Lara, you say that the gifts of ADHD, which is the title of one of your books, more or less, are a good place to start with finding strengths. What are the gifts of ADHD, and how do you help children really, find those gifts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you think about it, when we talk about attention deficit disorder, we're talking about a state of unfocus. And what we know is that there are many parts of our lives that depend on that unfocus. So, for example, creativity. When you look at the stages of creativity, the first one is preparation, but the second one is incubation. And what does that mean? It means kind of like just sitting on it. And so in a state of unfocus, and then an inspiration, that comes from this place of unfocus, and also not only creativity, but also this is where people come up with new ideas, and again, and also that it affects, as you can imagine, the emotional intensity also. Mm-hmm. So our emotional intensity comes from being present and kind of tuned in somatically and knowing what we're feeling in our body. And that would be very different from memorizing and focusing on a stream of conversation. And so that's emotional sensitivity. And then also empathy. When a lot of kids are not paying attention in a class, they may say, oh, I'm really tuned into what's going on with the kids, or I noticed the teacher looked stressed. And then, so of course, hyperactivity could also be called massive action, or, if you've ever gone to coaching, any, business people that are getting coaching, they say, how do you be successful? Massive action. But in the classroom, of course, they want you to sit still. So that can really translate. And in fact, there is research that entrepreneurs that are successful are willing to take lots of action and to fail on a certain number of those as long as they succeed on a few. And then the other thing is simply nature smart. And that may seem a little bit like a curveball, but what we know is that nature does restore attention. There's so much research about that now. And so this connection to nature is both an ecological consciousness, but also a strategy for restoring attention.
How do you practically take the mystery out of procrastination and fear of failure? Motivation and under motivation in the children you see, and how can we as parents and caregivers learn to do the same?
And so, I mean, one of the quickest things, again, is it comes down also to chunking. This is one of the biggest brain hacks, is to say, what if I just get started for 2 minutes? I talked about a 15-minute chunk, but anyone can do something for 2 minutes. And the hack in that is that once people get started, they will often keep going. And so that can be a very powerful procrastination, or a very powerful kind of remedy for procrastination. Another thing is to say, this is called rolling with resistance. Oh, okay. What are the benefits of procrastination? Because they're expecting you to say, don't stop doing this. And they'll say, well, I get to do things I feel like doing. And they realize that question is kind of, a paradox, in that they realize there's really no benefits to this. And then, so what are the costs to procrastination? And then they'll say, well, it's hanging over my head, and I don't get my work done, and my parents get mad at me, and I don't get the grades that I could get. So really, again, avoiding a control battle by saying, what are the benefits of this and what are the costs of it?
Helping them see, really, isn't it? Yeah. Well, we're going to take a little break now. You're listening to Crack the Podcast with me, Sandie Sedgbeer, and my co-host, Rebecca Schaper. And we're speaking with clinical psychologist, family therapist, and authority on attention deficit disorder, Dr. Lara Honos-Webb, about how the tools and information shared in her latest book, 6 Super Skills for Executive Functioning, can help parents and caregivers support their teens through these times of stress, anxiety, depression, and emotional turbulence. We'll be back with more from Dr. Lara Honos-Webb after this break.
The Real Conscious Connection. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers, pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Worried about your friend but don't know how to reach out?
You could say, how are you, or get a fake tattoo. You could ask with an app if it works for you. You could chat with them in VR. It's all good if you think you should check in. Yeah, you should. Whatever gets you talking.
Reach out to a friend about their mental health.
Whatever gets you talking.
Learn how you can help at seizetheawkward.org.
Welcome back. Dr. Lara Honos-Webb, Teens are notoriously protective of their privacy, and most will not confide in their parents. So how can we know if and when our child might have crossed that line between the normal teenage angst and insecurities, the resistance and the woes, into something that is a bit darker and riskier?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the benefit of the 6 super skills is that you can use it preventatively and proactively, and you can use it to open up conversations without a kind of a fear-based approach. And so, for example, let's say that you want to support your teens and kids, and you say, what do you see as some of your strengths? So you've opened up a conversation about who they think they are and what they're doing. And so you're opening up the conversation in a non-antagonistic way, a non-blaming way. And as you began to open up these conversations, and some other questions can be, what are your goals for this week? What are your goals for this year? What are your goals for the next 5 years? You can begin to, open up the conversation. And through that process, you could say, what do you think are going to be the challenges to you getting these goals? And in those moments, that could be a chance for them to open up and say, well, it could be, struggles with friendships. They may disclose substance use. They may disclose, I'm feeling depressed a lot. And again, looking and using your kind of visual cues to try to determine, are they smiling? Are they not smiling? What are they? And really using your own sensitivity, but really coming at it from these other angles. And if you start doing this now, I do believe that these can have some protective aspects, because once you help them to set their goals, again, the struggle becomes not between you and them, but between them and getting what they want for themselves.
Do you, I'm just curious, do you mention journaling?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, there's so many in the book. There's these kind of, here's some questions to explore and to answer. You can write it on your smartphone. You can write it in a journal. You can write it, finding that way that they will express themselves. And that is such a powerful tool, is journaling. And there's so much research that journaling has positive, not only mental health impacts, but health impacts.
Yeah, I feel like writing it down, it makes it real, and you're grounding it. Mm-hmm. Do you want to share some of the tools that you offer in your book about journaling?
Yeah. So, for example, when I invite people to write goals, mm-hmm. I also want to emphasize the element of, what is the purpose? Like, what's your mission statement? Meaning, we don't want to just get, because it can too easily become, I want to get all A's. I want to, get on the varsity team. And those are fantastic goals. But, what is your broader mission? And so there are some journaling exercises about purpose and mission. And then once you put the goal within that context, saying the next journal question is, and what is the next step? Mm-hmm. So we take the broadest possible view, like, what's your purpose in life? What's your mission statement? And then here's your goal, and what is one step you can take?
And what a powerful tool for them to go back and look what they have accomplished. Because I would think if maybe a parent is having a challenging time with their teenager, and maybe open up that book and say, look what you've done from this date to today. Mm-hmm. To me, that's a visual and powerful, I don't know, just something, I think, a strong statement.
Yeah. And I mean, people are really creative. I've had some families get out a journal that was like out in the public, and that it was, the mother would write what happened in their day, or a brother or parent, and then the child would write what happened in their day. And so it, there's this kind of open source journaling where the family can communicate. And so there, people can get really creative for how and they're going to use journaling.
I'm going to ask another curious question on the journaling. Do you find that the parent and the child can communicate sometimes better just to journal each other their thoughts versus verbally talking about it? I don't know. It's just a thought I had.
Yes. Yeah, I do think that is the case. And in fact, some people started these kind of, conversational journals when, before COVID, when one parent would be working and wouldn't be able to be there, and that, lives were so busy that they were really kind of keeping in touch that way. And so, yes, I think that people can, that we do know that writing, it has this ability to, we dive a little bit deeper because we're not doing the impression management. We're not protecting ourselves as much. And we can write for as long as we want without the other person maybe interrupting or looking at their facial expressions.
I think what you're talking about is giving kids as many open-ended opportunities where if there is something bothering them, there's the perfect little place for them to bring it forth.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Also, you write about the benefits of using the 4 Ps in depression, one of which is power. Mm-hmm. Are you finding teenagers are having a difficult time with accepting what they do and don't have the power to control? I'm just curious.
Especially now.
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. And the pandemic is a powerful example of that. And so, one of the things I write in the book is, here's a hot take on how to get wisdom. And it's knowing what you can control and knowing what you can't control. And that is such a long life lesson. Many parents or many teens and kids and I'm struggling with, parents that have addictions, parents that have depression. So this is super healthy, perfect people parenting kids with problems.
Exactly.
And, there's a story about a teen whose parent was smoking weed and their friend smelled the weed in the car and felt a lot of shame about that and helping her to see, well, you can't control your dad. You can't cure your dad. And you're not the cause of these problems. But here's some things that you can do to regulate your own emotions. And you don't need to feel shame about it, or you can label that shame. You can put that, say, I'm feeling a lot of shame right now. Is this helpful or unhelpful to me? And recognizing that it's not helpful to kind of, spin around in that shame for a long time. And then helping them to, again, this is where the gifts come in. Mm-hmm. Because many kids are out of control. Their parents are divorcing, or they're using substances, or they themselves are having mental health challenges, and helping them to find their own strengths and remember their past successes is a way of resourcing and what would we call healing the shame that can come with all the family dynamics that are pretty typical and common, frankly.
Mm. Tell us about the other 3 Ps, pleasure, presence, and permission.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So pleasure, this is fascinating because in some ways, of course, it's the cure for depression, but there is this treatment, which is called behavioral activation. And all that it means is that a therapist will say, let's list, 10 healthy pleasures that you enjoy. And your goal is to do 3 of these healthy pleasures a day. But what's fascinating about this is it's empirically validated. And one study compared just behavioral activation to CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And they found out that they were equally effective for treating depression. So it is one of the simplest things that anyone can do. And it simply means, I'm going to make a recipe. I'm going to do some artwork. I'm going to go collect some pine cones, whatever that is. That those healthy pleasures actually scientifically are a treatment for depression. And so pleasure really captures that. And then permission has to do with overcoming all of the shoulds, and it can mean permission to, for example, when I guide kids to write about their, purpose and their mission in life, I don't think people will be surprised to know that so many times they get messages about what they should do, and they find out that, really, I would be more interested in this pathway. rather than what your parents want you to do. Or I'm not saying they shouldn't listen to their parents, but and for some people that it can just simply be permission to take a break, that they're driving themselves so hard, they don't realize that restoring your attention is really fundamental to keeping that focus. And then in terms of presence, this simply has to do, we could put it in the category of mindfulness, but I also mean it in a much broader sense, that the sense of, actually, I remember one time I had this dream, and it was, I was sitting on the porch of a house and I was just drinking lemonade with some friends. And I woke up from the dream and I said, that's not a dream. What's that about? I wasn't doing anything. And I really had this insight that just like sitting on a porch and drinking lemonade and just enjoying, life, that is life. And we get too caught up into performance demands, and particularly, with kids in school today, it's all about the grades. It's all about the competition. And presence is so much about enjoying that moment.
Yes, definitely. And also, breathing techniques. Do you offer breathing techniques as well? So, would you say breathe, then pause, or pause, then breathe? Does it matter which way? If they get into a situation where it's either fight or flight?
Breathing, yes. Breathing, I say that breathing is the number one performance enhancer. The number one. And, just the simple difference between shallow breathing and belly breathing is a starting point. We call that diaphragmatic breathing. That should be, and it's they teach that at high level sports in terms of this is, a performance enhancer, but our kids need it too, in terms of learning that they can take charge of their body simply by taking deep breaths into their belly, breathing in through their nose, and holding that breath. And so it's the simplest intervention and also the most powerful.
Your book, Listening to Depression, How Understanding Your Pain Can Heal Your Life, is a guide to translating your pain into purpose, which you were talking about. Can this book help parents with their children's anxiety and depression? What is your success rate? Are you...
Yeah, I find that, even within one session, you can see a real shift in terms of, as we're talking about, whether it be permission, pleasure, presence, or power, so that you can see these dramatic changes when, it can be as simple as this, what makes, because again, we almost have to redirect their attention, because those negative emotions can become in their own way, addictive in some ways, that they become, we're creating a neural pathway where that becomes the main default almost. And so we want to create this other neural pathway and say, what makes you happy? What are you excited about in the future? What makes you feel secure? And what are you grateful for? And simply going through this process, you can see shifts almost immediately.
I can see where it's just almost like a relief for them. Yeah.
You say that many times depression is a call to re-enter life instead of just going through the motions. What do you mean by that? Can you expand on that for us?
I think that it's really that we have so many internalized ideas about these shoulds. And so many times depression may sound like, actually, let's say they go to college and they are saying, I'm going to be a business major because I want to, get out of school quickly and make a lot of money. And then they find they're depressed and they can't, they're not keeping up with their homework. And so the re-entry would be, I really am more interested in biology. And maybe I want to go down the path of being a scientist, or maybe I want to be a doctor. But it really, again, it creates a shift that there's something within themselves that is more interesting to them. And, I also want to kind of call out, I know that there's been this backlash against do what you love, because there's been some, maybe some people got college degrees and then they said, I want to be a pastry chef. And parents said, don't do what you love. But we can downgrade that to do what you're interested in. And in fact, when I talk about the science of attention management, interest is actually a synonym for attention. And so they are the same thing. And so when you're interested in something, you can pay attention. And so that it can be that, in that depression, when it's harder to focus and harder to pay attention, you're like, okay, what comes easy to me? And you begin to find what is most in alignment with your interests and your personality type. And, and I also like to remind parents that other than rocket science or genetic engineering, one of the biggest predictors of success in life is that social and emotional skills. And so if it turns out that your kid isn't going to be a rocket scientist, there's such a pathway for success for them in life.
There's been quite a lot of talk recently, I don't know about in the US, but in the UK, from Saatchis and different kinds of large companies saying that what they're looking for now in the kids, coming in to the business world are the social and emotional skills, not the, academic qualifications. And yet the schools are still so focused on grades and not necessarily, the ESL.
Exactly. And so hopefully that's encouraging what you're saying. And hopefully that message gets out that the businesses will say, we want to see, the social and emotional skills. And I think there's no question that the overfocus on grades is problematic in the sense that what we know about the brain development is that chronic stress, as you're setting your brain up for depression and anxiety. And so you're changing the brain. And, some research that came out before the pandemic was showing that when they look at college students, 20% of them had mental health challenges. But the one number that was very shocking to me was 9% were reporting that they had attempted suicide. And these are students already in college. And so and I can't, we don't know how and why those numbers are so high. And so again, this was before the pandemic, those numbers came out, but we have to wonder if every test you take is, promoting this fight or flight response. It's like, it's like our nervous system evolved to be nervous. And yet here we have every day a test or a homework assignment or this, that it's like, imagine that it's like you're confronting a lion in the jungle every day.
Yeah.
What would you like to see change?
I think that when we talk about change, I have to say I'm an educational nonconformist. So I actually think that certainly in elementary school, and I will say the research does support this, there shouldn't be homework. I'm just going to say that.
I agree.
And to be honest,
I'm with you.
To be honest with you, I sent my kids to a school that had no homework in elementary school. I made that choice. And actually the research came out that there's no, educational benefits to homework in the elementary school, and that actually it creates conflicts in families. Because can you imagine parents, they've got 3 kids and they're in elementary school and they're doing all this homework, and then the parents are stressed and it creates an environment. And so I understand that that's radical. I understand that there's a lot of people that are going to be scared of that idea. But what we're really missing out is developmentally, that is this even appropriate? And I know that there's other pathways to success. When I was in elementary school, of course, a long time ago, I don't even remember if I got grades. I don't know what they would have been. And I remember recess, and I remember we had juice and cookie time. And so I actually am a lot more revolutionary than I'm even alluding to right now. But at least the research supports the part about elementary school should not be a very stressful time.
Well, I can see that. I'm sorry, Sandie.
That's okay.
Just one moment here. I hear you. And actually, I validate what you're saying. Of course, my 2 daughters are out of school, out of college, and married. But I can see where that would just cause so much more stress in the family.
Mm-hmm.
And especially during COVID, when these parents and the kids had to get this homework done and this. I mean, how could you not walk away not feeling extremely stressed, overwhelmed, anxieties? I think you make a very good point. Who knows, maybe in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think they really do need to overhaul the whole system and look at what are we really trying to achieve here, you know, and are we doing it? No, we're not. I'm curious to know, when you became a psychologist, what guided you in this particular direction? You know, the ADHD focus. I mean, you've written so many books on ADD, ADHD workbooks, you know, for the adults and the children. What was it about that particular arena that attracted you so much?
Well, to give a historical perspective on ADHD, when I grew up, I had a brother that was diagnosed with ADHD, and I wanted to, you know, and to give you a perspective of how much he was the only person I knew that had ADHD. And in fact, when we graduated from high school, he was still the only person I knew. And so it's something that I grew up with and that I myself experienced ADHD. And so watching how, you know, and I think of, you know, my brother, for example, is one of the most creative people I know. He's, you know, successful in, you know, creative marketing. And so it was just really obvious to me that, you know, while, you know, that it was very real. I mean, challenges in school, you know, were always real and, you know, never became easy, but he went on to have, you know, success. And so just that it was something that was very familiar to me. And, so that was one of the reasons for that direction.
You know, I mean, I know a number of kids who have been diagnosed with ADHD, including my own grandson, and there is nothing wrong with his attention when he's engaged. It's when he's, you know, listening to somebody who is not engaging him that his attention wanders. And I think we, you know, same for all of us.
Yeah.
But the thing about ADHD that, you know, I think it was Tom Hartman in the Edison gene. He talked about this being the creative gene. And, yes, you know, we can't drug the creative gene out of our kids. And it's not that they can't focus. It's that they notice everything. They focus on everything, you know. So I really do think that many of these things are blanket, you know, excuses for something that we don't want to look at, which is, you know, we're just not educating the children or engaging them in a way that's going to help them.
Yeah, and I think it's important to bring in the idea of neurodiversity, because I do think that there is a legitimate difference that gets called ADHD, and that is a mismatch for the educational system. And so I do think that there, you know, for example, there is this gene which is called the nomad gene, and they so if you imagine that some percentage of the population has ancestors that whenever they saw a horizon, they ran for it, and that was a wonderful way to find more resources. And how hard that is for them to be in an educational system where the focus is on memorization, and you know, as they get older, and that as a, you know, the kind of teaching to the test versus, you know, increasing this curiosity. And, you know, I mean, school could be, I mean, it's wonderful to learn about the world, but if it becomes about what grade did you get? What grade did you get? And I mean, I hear stories that, you know, even in elementary school, parents will say to other kids, what grade did you get on the quiz today? And, you know, so there's this kind of culture of it's all about the grades. And I think the younger they are, the less appropriate that is, because I actually believe that if you can instill a love of learning, that you will have successful students when you love learning. And I've always had that, and that's what has really got me through, that curiosity and loving to learn new things. And somehow that has not become a priority.
But kids are natural learners, aren't they?
Yeah.
They are natural learners, just if they're interested. Sorry, Rebecca.
No, that's fine. What are your thoughts on medication?
I have a lot of flexible thinking about medication because, I see, for some people as adults they need that to support their family. But of course, I also see the other side of it, which are, some serious side effects. And of course, that the older the teens get, there is, can become abuse or addiction to the medication. So I have flexible thinking about that.
Yeah. We have about 5 minutes left. I want to ask you about the programs that you offer for parents and kids. I know you have a variety of them. Could you speak to those for a bit?
Yeah, so I do have a program, video program for parents to interact with their kids in a way that they're building these super skills. And so it helps them to, learn about them and learn how to start conversations with their kids or teens to begin to focus on these. And so I have one program for that. I also have one which is mostly, for adults, teens could use it, which is just bite-sized chunks of guidance for 5 days a week for 6 weeks. And so, for example, one day it might say, what's your highest priority for today? And what's your highest priority for this week? Really simple things, and having them, do little exercises, because I think people with ADHD get lost in where do I start? And they might be working on things they don't need until later and then procrastinating on something that they had to have done that day. So really simple guidance, and also through some of the basics in terms of time in nature restores attention, and some suggestions for exercise, getting out in nature. How do you engage with that? And so it's just kind of a bite-sized chunks of guidance and direction, and lots of additional resources, including some videos and some audios of interviews with other people.
I know you mentioned a little bit about the social media at the beginning of the podcast, but I do have a question about social media. Instead of having face-to-face conversations, teens today are using social media to communicate. Mm-hmm. What helpful hints can you give parents to help guide their teenager with better coping and communication skills?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that it comes back again to being able, you can almost take each of the super skills and say, if they feel hurt by something, okay, well, what are your strengths? What are some other reasons that, you can be successful? What are some reasons that they're wrong? And then setting goals, it may be, why don't you set a goal to limit your social media use to, maybe 1 hour a day? And we know that these teens, they have their phones next to them and pinging throughout the night.
Right. Yeah.
So setting some limits and and so the differences between a power struggle would be like, you can only use your phone this amount of time. And of course, parents can and should set some limits. But having part of that conversation be, what's your goal? I notice you're really upset when these things happen. Why don't you limit your use? And what would be your goal? And then use that as a starting point for whatever limits you want to set.
Do you find that maybe the teens are trying to communicate with another teen to get that support? I'm just curious, through the phone or whatever.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that there's certainly benefits also. And, one of the things that happened, and of course it's all been mixed up with COVID, whatever we were saying before COVID, because this may be the only social connections they get to protect our health. Yeah. And so one of the things that I've observed myself, and I've had other, my observations with my clients and parents of clients, is that, for example, video games, of course, it can be addictive, it can be problematic, and you want to make sure, that there's some balance, but that they communicate, in video games, it's usually a group process, and they're working together to achieve different, goals and accomplishments. And so that there's benefits to it. Certainly we noticed during COVID, and it was a way to have that sense of belonging.
Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time now. Rebecca, I think, have you got one last question?
I just a statement. Just would like to say in closing, I'd just like to remind everyone that while May is designated as Mental Health Awareness Month, we need to be mindful and caring of this important part of our health and well-being, and that our children all year round, and adults as well. I mean, this is ongoing. It's just not the month of May.
Yeah.
And that's
Absolutely.
why we're here, to help bring more awareness. And thank you so much for being here, and I really enjoyed this conversation with you.
Lara, is there any last quick thing that you want to add?
Just if you walk away from this conversation and you can only think of 2 words, think of appreciation and acceptance. We really have to connect with the teens and our kids and accept the developmental challenges are all very real, and we all have different brains, all kinds of minds. We need to respect all kinds of minds, neurodiversity. Absolutely.
Well said. Yeah. Well, Dr. Lara Honos-Webb, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And 6 Super Skills for Executive Functioning is published by Harbinger. And while the book is written for teens with executive functioning challenges, because young adults don't fully develop their prefrontal cortex until 25, these skills will be helpful for all teens. So don't think that it's only for kids that have got challenges. I mean, I've certainly learned an awful lot from what you've been telling us. There's so many tips and ways to talk to children. Mm-hmm. So you can learn more about Dr. Honos-Webb's courses, programs and books at addisagift.com. And that's it for today. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Crack the Podcast. Till then, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
And don't forget, there's a crack in everything. It's where the light gets in.
Mm-hmm.